I'm going to hand over to, we've got Amy and Grace with us. I'm going to hand over to Amy first, who can do a little introduction.
Yeah, I'll just say a quick hello. My name's Amy Bell. I use they, them pronouns. I've been a freelance dance maker, performer, person involved with touring various different projects for about 15 years. And for the last couple of years, I have been working as the artist development producer at the place. But I'll hand over to Grace because I think you're probably going to chat first in a bit more detail, right?
Thank you, Amy. And hello, everybody. Lovely to see either your face or your name on my screen. Yeah, so my name is Grace Okereke. I am an independent producer and I work predominantly in dance and sometimes I moonlight, you know, some other art forms. Yeah, predominantly I work in dance. So I'm going to just kind of open up and I'm going to give you a little bit of background about my journey. And you can take from that what you might want to. Hopefully it kind of, you realize we've all been in the same boat at one point in our lives. And then I'll talk a little bit, after my background, I'll talk a little bit about how I work now and what I do and some of my experiences around touring. And I've got 20 to 20 something minutes, so I'll try and do it in that time. So as I mentioned, so I work predominantly in dance, and that is what I trained in, and I'm doing the kind of air quotation marks. I went to Higher Education Institute, Middlesex University, and I did train. I would say that after I left university, or should I say the last year of my course, I was panicked, let's not lie. I was just like, I don't know, what am I going to do? What's going on? What? I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew I'd been training for, or going through this for 3 years. And before that, I did performing arts, and I was actually in the youth company at the place when I was in college. But now going into the real world, I was really unsure. And when I tell you, I decided to audition for a lot of things that I had no interest in. That's basically what happened. I, scoured the open, because I didn't have an agent, I wasn't planning on getting an agent. I scoured the kind of open call audition platforms, and I went, and I would say my furthest moment was when I got into the second or third stage of Aida, which is a musical, and then I had to sing, and then nothing happened after that. I couldn't sing. I just don't audition, with singing in mind. So I did do that, but quite seriously, so the last year of university was when I was trying to figure out what I would do. I was teaching, I started teaching a lot, and I also still wanted to continue to perform. So I actually did all of that at the same time. And then added to that, I took my own, because the kind of personality type I am, I took my own initiative and I produced my first event. And it was a community performance platform, and I managed to get some money from the Prince's Trust, and I think they have a scheme that might still exist, and it's something along the lines of the Young Entrepreneur Scheme. I think either that's what it's called now, or what it used to be called, or something similar to that. And that was kind of my road into understanding that there was more out there than just the performance element and the teaching element. And that was done, and it was very, it was interesting. I enjoyed a lot of the process, and I absolutely hated it at the same time. So I'm not sure how everybody's finding it, but when you're considering doing something that's your own, whether it's your own work or creating a platform or whatever it is, the kind of feeling that I felt, I think I described it, I felt like a hustler. So I had to make this event work, and I had only a few £100, and I had a general idea of what should happen, and I knew that I could, be organized, and that was it. That was the end. And so it was what I found difficult was those kind of negotiations when you weren't offering people, when you felt that you didn't have much to offer by the way of pay. And it was just like, can you just do me a favor? And so kind of, that really did support in terms of my negotiation skills. I did get a lot. It wasn't just me, it was me and somebody else. But I did manage to get a lot for nothing, and that was like exchanges. So at the time as well, I was still dancing. So I was dancing with Impact Dance, which is a company founded by Hakeem Anabudo. But at the same time, I'm from East London, and there was like Boy Blue were in the showcase, but they were Boy Blue 20 years ago, not Boy Blue now. So that kind of access that I had to people would sound impressive now, but at the same time, we were all in a similar boat at that moment in time. It was not 20 years ago. I'm actually younger than I've just made out. I just can't count. Yes, it was a little bit less than that. So so I would negotiate. They would have. I would get free space for them, and I got free space because I worked in the gym. I worked in 2 gyms. I had several jobs. I still do. I worked in the gym, and I managed to convince the gym to give me some space. Blah blah blah. So it was things like that. Anyway, the event happened. It was actually really good. It was a really fun, successful event. But I was torn. I was really I enjoyed it, but I hated it at the same time. But I carried on with the teaching and so on and the performing. But what I'm trying to say is I continue to try and make my own opportunities. And after time had settled, I said, actually, I did like this kind of management side of it. And so I knew that very early on after graduating, but I have to say, I did just jump into what I consider everything at once. But not understanding what the management side was, I actually contacted East London Dance, who I was teaching for, and I think I literally just said, oh, I just want to get some work experience in an office. Do you mind? And they said yes. Long story short, I worked for them for 3 years in the office, projects assistant, I don't ever think they gave me that project coordinator. What do you call it? Promotion, but it's okay. We won't talk about that now. That was many years ago. I gave it to myself. And anyway, so I did do that. So I worked there, but that's where my experience came from. And in that time, I was doing exactly the same thing. I think about 4 years after I graduated, I was teaching, I was rehearsing, I was doing the administrative side of arts or dance and, kind of management. After that point, I kind of decided, okay, I know where I'm going, and I wanted to focus on the management side. It was kind of what I enjoyed doing and where my strengths lie. So that's how I kind of came onto this. And then through the years, I have been employed. I worked for Greenwich Dance, and I've worked a little bit for Rumbo. I worked for Rumbo for a little bit of time, I should say, in that way. But I have also been, and I think that's a span of 8 years if you kind of you put all the kind of 3 years here, 3.5 years here, there, and blah blah blah. But then I've also been independent, self-employed as an independent freelancer since about 2014. So again, you can't think that quickly. And that's been me working fully independently. And again, when I did that, I wasn't sure. I wasn't exactly sure. I was like project assistants. I've always been in programming teams. But when I went independent, I didn't understand what that term that everyone was using, producer, really meant. So I had to define it for myself because I wasn't making work. So it was, and I didn't know and I didn't understand the kind of parameters that were set. And especially I think creative producer was used a lot. But so I've been, project manager, tour coordinator. I've done marketing and events management, and I've got probably a couple of other titles, but I did land with producer the moment I started taking full responsibility for the kind of delivery of a project. So I now, at this stage, work alongside artists, and they will come to me and say, okay, this is the idea, this is the next performance, and I'll go, okay, don't do anything. You're not allowed to do anything, just keep thinking, but don't move. I will come up with the kind of budget, look at who we could possibly think about with partners. I start with a budget. I have to start with knowing how much this idea would cost. Sometimes I talk to them about what they tell me what they want, and sometimes I completely change it. Sometimes I don't, because if a project looks like it's going to cost 100,000, I'm just like, I don't know if I could do that right now. So I might alter it, and then they'll go, no, I need 18 dancers. I'm like, no, 5. So we negotiate, basically, is what I'm saying. And then once we've kind of come to agreement with the budget and understanding what our possible timelines will be, then we just, depending on who I'm working with, move forward to make that happen. And that usually, and I would say when I start a project to when it's on stage could be 2 years. And that's from the idea. Then you have to kind of deal with the kind of structure and shaping and deciding what that is. And then I deal with the fundraising and building the partnerships and building what's needed to make it, the collaborators. Actually, I'll take that, let me take that back. It's the idea, and then it's the structure of what it is, the timeline, having an idea of who the partners are, because there's no money yet. So it's like talking to people, or at least earmarking who we're interested in. Then I start talking to venues and other kind of people that might, you know, I understand that, you know, Amy at the place and the priorities that they have there. So I go, actually, this really works well. So I will go and have a conversation with them about that. And from there, as soon as I get one person on board, or as I'm having a decent conversation with one person, then I'll go to dances. And I said, well, you know, Amy at the place is interested. I actually did do that, Amy. I did do that. And then I'm like, and this is, you know, we're looking at this ballpark figure, so hopefully you can match it. And then once that's happened, one of the last things I do is actually put in an Arts Council application, because the project needs to be really well constructed and almost ready to begin before I'm comfortable submitting an Arts Council application for it, because that is one of their criteria. So basically, that's where I am now. But my journey to get to where I am now came from me just trying everything. And within arts management, I have tried, I think I mentioned marketing. I wanted to do development. I'm talking about doing like either courses or apply for fellowships, or just said, oh, can I do this? Or just been thrown in at the deep end and just kind of like, oh, you're marketing now. Oh, okay, sure. Or part of, you know, I went on tour with, I've been on tour, and I've had to deal with the social media whilst we were on tour, and I don't personally like social media. So that was just something that, you know, I had to think about what we're going to do, how we're going to do it to sustain that visibility whilst we're performing. So my experience has come on the job, and some of it has been like unintentional. Most of it has been intentional in terms of like understanding, but I landed at producer knowing that I definitely did not like marketing. I flirted with fundraising, but actually within my producer role, I fundraise. And that's just the kind of work that I do, but not everybody does. Also, my relationship with artists and the artists that I work with, I do give feedback, I do give artistic feedback, but I come in at very specific times, and the people that I work with, we have a relationship of trust. So I can be really honest and open about something, and they can trust it, and I can trust them. You know, if then we go, I see the next rehearsal and I'm like, that thing's still in there. Why is that thing still in there? And they just say, because, you know, this is what we want. I'm like, all right, whatever, I'll work around it. You know, something like that. It's fine. We have to trust each other. And sometimes just because I say something doesn't mean it has to be. But you know, I also know they'll listen to me if what I say makes sense to them. And just to talk about that in terms of kind of my situation right now. So I've worked with many companies over the years, as I said, as I kept changing my title. But right now, I have a company called Uprise Rebel, and the aim of starting that company is to support Black female artists or creators. I say creators and makers. Also, Black female arts managers or administrators in the umbrella sense, and also kind of the diversity of audiences. So within that, the three companies are, although I started working with them before Uprise Rebel, I'm just labeling them Uprise Rebel. You know, that's what you've got to do. You've also got to have some creative marketing skills there. But is Uchenna Dance, Elaine Dance, and Alessandra Sutan vocab dance. So those are kind of the three main companies, and we've all been Elaine Dance. We've been working together the least amount of time, since I think this is year 4. Uchenna from the beginning, which is the year 12, 13, I don't know. And Alessandra, I've known her for the same amount of time, but again, we've only been working together in this structure for about 4 years, though we have worked together over the past 15 years a few times. And so, and then within that, Uchenna Dance has mainly done a lot of UK touring. So we've been part of Rural Touring twice, I think. Rural Touring Dance Initiative, so that's touring rural locations in the UK, and 2 of our productions have toured extensively. So the Head Wrap Diaries toured for about 3.5 years nationally, and that was a successful piece. And then also Hansel and Gretel, which was co-commissioned by The Place, and that one's for children and young people, and that toured for about a year, I think, or 18 months, or at least the span of the project was 18 months. Elaine Dance toured predominantly internationally, and I have to say that what's really, and Alessandra, sorry, Elaine Dance toured mainly internationally, and Alessandra makes work less frequently, I would say, but when we do make work, again, it's UK and then more European countries. And all apart from Uchenna, the other 2 companies, we've all got productions in that are happening, have been happening, will be happening. So there is work, and that's still going on. And then I also kind of want to mention, because my time is moving pretty quickly, the kind of work that I have been, especially over the past 18 months, touring. So you've got the regular kind of physical touring that has, you know, you go somewhere, your company goes somewhere, you perform on stage or outdoors, wherever it is, and then you leave again. That is resuming in terms of the work I do now. Elaine Dance will be at Norfolk and Norwich Festival this weekend, and part of Without Walls, we've had that commission, so we're doing that now. Then one thing I've done quite a lot, it feels like, over the past 18 months is digital touring. So 3 works that I worked on. So one is Elaine Dance again. We've got a piece called Reunited. That one was made last summer. Digital touring is interesting because it's great. Well, when we did it, when we created the work, there was the more opportunities for people with organizations presenting work digitally. It wouldn't have happened like that, you know, 2 years ago. But it's still a bit of a slog. I'm not going to lie. You know, you still have to do the same kind of email contacts, contacting people and having those discussions about, will this fit on their program? Won't it fit on their program? We had a very deliberate approach, and we only approached venues that we had an existing relationship with. So there was no cold calling when it came to this, because I just didn't know how that would work. It was just like, you know, we've been there physically and performed, or we have a friendly relationship, and that's who we targeted. And I think we presented it 4 or 5 times so far for different durations. There was one new relationship to Elaine Dance, but that was only because I knew who the artist director was through something else. It was just like one of those tedious links, and I was just like, oh, but she might like it. So there is that. And then Alessandra Sutan is actually, she's commissioned by The Place. I think I'm going to say The Place a lot. Sorry, Amy. Commissioned by The Place and Welcome Collection to create a new piece called Inside Head. I'm just going to put that there because it's live right now. Don't look at it now, look at it later. And again, this work is interesting because the way that we're likely to tour it after, so it's a commission, the commissioners have got the rights to it right now, but there's going to be a stage production that is, the stage production actually came first, and then this digital variation of the stage work is what this is, but it's not a stage piece filmed. You have to watch it and it's interactive. And so I have an idea of touring this digital work alongside the live work and making an offer to the venues that means that they would get an opportunity, so people can come into the theatre and watch the live piece, but a lot, you know, people who can't make it will see something of the inspiration and the idea behind Boy Breaking Glass, which is what this show is inspired by, is a production called Boy Breaking Glass. So that's another way. So it's like coupling digital work with live work. And then the final one is I'm working for a theatre company, Diverse City, and we made a theatre piece. And again, same approach, only contacted venues that Diverse City had a really good relationship with. We've shown it 3 or 4 times, but it's theatre. And one thing I would note with theatre, they have a longer run just in general, like in terms of dances, like, you know, one night stands, we all say that. If you're lucky, you get 2 nights. But theatre, they had it for a week. I think Barbican had it for 2 weeks, but they might have had it for 1 week. I can't remember. It was something like that. So that's kind of also a different relationship. Then the other kind of touring that I would mention is kind of project-based, is something that I've done as well. So when I went on tour with Luca Silvestrini from Protein Dance, it was a project and a performance. And it was very community orientated. It was like an incidental performance piece. And we were there in a town centre, and we performed twice a day for 2 weeks. And then we recruited local people to be part of the finale event. And it was just like, what those type of tours are, time consuming, they take a lot of coordination. I think that was with Southeast Dance. I think we actually did one with Southeast Dance. I remember, this was so long ago, but yes, my memory's coming back. And yeah, so those are kind of the main ways that I have toured work over the years, both in the UK and internationally. And I think I'll round that up to let Amy come in, and then we can speak after. Thank you very much.
Amazing, thanks, Grace. It's so interesting hearing that, how you've navigated all those different things and the skills you brought together. I always think it's really useful to hear like an individual person's experience, because you understand like everyone does it different. And so yeah, it's great to hear that. Thanks. What I thought I might do is just sort of outline like 9 different areas that might be useful to think about if you have got a work that you want to take on tour and you're like, how am I going to do that? These are not the right things to think about. I don't necessarily have all the answers. You may well know more than me about various bits of them, but it's useful perhaps just to put them out there as prompts for thinking. Do ask questions as we go along, or we can save them till the end. So yeah, maybe just to pick up what Grace is saying, there's loads of different types of touring now, right? So obviously there's like live performance touring, which could be in a theatre, could be in a gallery, could be outdoors. Already there's a big range there. There's digital touring, which could look like film or AR or VR, podcasts, online events, all kinds of new things I'm sure you've all been doing already. And then this idea of like concept touring, where you take the idea to different places rather than the people. So I imagine that you might be busy with any kind of combination of those things, and we can talk about them in a bit more detail later if you want. So here are some like 9 things that could be useful to think about. You've got to work, how do I get it out there? So one of the first places that's useful to start is securing your team, is thinking like, who do I need around me to get this out there? And that's to do with, I guess, identifying your gaps in knowledge, or maybe your gaps in capacity, and thinking, do you need some technical advice? Do you need some producing advice? Do you need networks? Do you just not know the right people? Like, where are your gaps and who do you need to help you get there? Who do you already know who can help you get there? So who are your allies or your previous collaborators, like people whose knowledge you can draw on, even just for a coffee or a chat, or perhaps those that you might actually want to work with and collaborate with closely as you're preparing it. That's really useful, just to be realistic about what you think you're going to be able to do, what you enjoy doing, what you like Grace is saying, like, oh, actually I love this bit or I hate that bit. If you hate it, see if you can get someone else to do it. Like, if you're really busy with 5 other jobs, maybe like realistically need to get someone else on board. I'm just going to talk about some really obvious things. You might be like, yeah, that's really obvious, but sometimes it's useful just to hear them anyway. A big sense of this is also availabilities, and finding a way to navigate a whole bunch of people's availabilities over a prolonged period of time with lots of uncertainty. So what is a useful way for you to do that? There's online calendars and things like that can be really useful, but there's, what's that sense of dialogue that you're going to need to keep that active over possibly quite a long period, to keep that bunch of people engaged and involved in the project? Might be your dancers, might be a production manager, lots of different people. So how do you secure that team and keep them tight around you in the way that's going to be supportive for this process of preparing to go on tour? The other thing to know about your team is like, what are their requirements on tour? What do they need to be well to work? What do they need, time-wise to do their job? What do they need access-wise? Make sure you know what their needs and requirements are. And the other idea is to have a kind of pool of people. So, you know, it might be that you're working with a bunch of dancers, but it's useful to already have like some backup people in mind, especially touring technicians as well. Maybe you've got your dream babe that you love working with, but perhaps they're often in demand. So it's useful to start to build relationships and think about a pool of people that you could have. So that's one thing. Then another thing, and this team will hopefully help you do this, of various different areas of kind of materials to prepare or thinking to do. So one is preparing a tech rider. If English isn't your first language, rider sounds like a funny word. It's like riding a horse or something. What is that? It's basically a document that outlines exactly like what you need, what you're going to ask for from a technical point of view from a venue. And it is a document of a lot of detail. So it's like, we need exactly this light, we need this one, we need this side stage, we need, you know, it also means like, what people do you need? For example, will you bring a technician or do you want them to bring one? There's lots of, you know, it's all of that detail. What do you need technically? It can also include stuff like, and I've been in productions that have done this, like, we'll need someone to iron the costumes before the show and you need to provide, you know, it's like, it's granular detail. And it's actually a really big part of how performances, gigs get agreed, because you could have an incredible piece that a venue is completely in love with, but if they look at the tech rider and see like that they're going to need to hire in, for example, like massive rostra that's going to cost them thousands of pounds, maybe they don't have that money, or maybe your projection won't work if the stage is only a certain size. If their stage is a different size, then, you know, is that going to work? And there can be it's really worth getting a properly done professional tech rider. Doesn't matter how simple your work is, even you've got a work that's like a gallery performance that happens in daylight, you'll actually realize that there are specific things that you need. I need a space that I can warm up in that isn't in front of the public. I need a floor that's clean. Like, this is part of the contract, that they will do what you say on the rider, so that you don't rock up and say, look, there's glass on the floor. You know what I mean? It's like even really basic stuff like that that feels obvious. It's really useful to do. And it's definitely, if it's not your skill set, it's really definitely worth getting a technician or a production manager to help you prepare that document so that you can provide that to prospective bookers. The other thing about it is that you need to understand that document in granular detail as well, because if a venue says, oh yes, we've got a, you know, B64 par lamp, but we haven't got a C85, you need to understand if that is going to jeopardize your lighting design or not. You know, is that okay? Could you work with that? Or is it going to completely mess up your projection? Or, you know, you need to understand, I suppose, what the deal breakers inside your tech rider will be. Tech rider is quite interesting for something like a digital work as well. You know, like, do you require the work to be in a certain format only? Is there something about sound quality that's important? Or if it's like, you know, who's going to bring in what part of the technology? This is where the sort of nitty-gritty of the concrete reality of the thing gets debated, I suppose, or agreed. And in the concept, if you're touring a concept, there's loads there, like as Grace was giving that example, like invisible dancing, like I can't imagine what the rider would have been like around that. So that's really a useful thing to think about. And also to build in flexibility with what things can you be flexible with and what things are deal breakers. Okay. I'm just going to plow on unless you've got questions, so I'm just going to get into it. Another area you might want to give some thought to and prepare around is access. That's also something that you could think about making a rider for, that you can also go to organisations with. And I'm just going to pop here in the chat an example of a rider template that was made by Alexandrina Hemsley. This is absolutely not the only way to do this. This is just one example of how you might organise a tech rider. And it's a way to kind of lay out for an organisation, a venue or a festival, the way that you're going to work best, or your team perhaps work best. the thing about this ride is there's loads of space for you to kind of make it your own, and there's an invitation there to totally do what you like with that rider. It's quite detailed, and yours wouldn't necessarily have to be as detailed as that if you didn't want to. But it's really important to fold that into your thinking, actually. Do you or your team have access needs that you want the venue or the festival to, oh, thanks, Lee. There's another really good example there from Unlimited. It's another way to do it. You can also, of course, just make up your own way to do it as well, but some people have already done some good work around this, so it can save you a bit of time and labour. So it's really important that you set out clearly what you need to work, and so that then organisations and festivals can be aware of it, they can budget for it, and you can have sort of frank discussions about what is and isn't going to be possible. Another area around access that you might want to think about is the access for audiences that in your work. So how accessible is your work currently, and how accessible do you want it to be? I guess a word on that is that you can't make, I think it's almost impossible to make a work completely accessible to everybody, right? So with that in mind, what are the main barriers to different people enjoying and experiencing your work, and how might you think about that on tour? So things like providing BSL interpretation or captioning, relaxed performances, audio description, pre-show information can be really important for people. Touch tours, there's loads of different things that you can think about. And again, thinking about your team, who might you want to work with, and particularly in this case, pay to help you develop this part of your work. And this is something that you could apply for Arts Council money if you were going to do that, to develop. And this is a really good area for conversation with venues and festivals. You know, what can they provide? What do they do? What kind of audiences do they have? How accessible is their venue? What are they doing about access? You know, how can you work together to create the kind of experience that you would like your audiences to have? Okay, another area is sustainable touring. So you might want to think about the environmental impact of touring, because sometimes touring involves travel, or it's sort of it's a series of practices which have an environmental impact. And here's a couple of links that you might find useful to think about that. So one is Julie's Bicycle, which are like an amazingly expert organisation that think about environmental practice across the arts sector. And another useful one is I'm just going to drop in here the chat, it's called the Green Book. And that is a resource. It's not entirely finished yet, but the section that is finished is on sustainable productions, and it helps you think about folding sustainability into your work from the beginning. It's not just about transport. It might be, you know, your company policy on plastic use, or you know, how you're sourcing your props and costumes, or it could be things like what order of touring you do, so that you're not doing journeys like this, but you could do a journey like that saves fuel, or I don't know. You might also think about negotiating, you know, flights versus trains and stuff like that. And around preparing that, I suppose, is thinking about the sustainability of your project, but also what your values are, what do you care about, what's practical. Have a look and see what some ideas are. And it's another really good topic of conversation with any venues or festivals that you're approaching. Number 5, wraparound. So you might not care about this, you might be thrilled, this might be your absolute area of expertise, but what things might you want to do around your work? So you've got your work, whatever that is. Are there elements that can be really engaging or exciting for people to take part in, or that could build your audience, or be a really useful experience for your team and for audiences and for venues? Like, what could those be? So typically it's like workshops or discussions, but it could also be like sector development events or pop-up craft sessions, or I remember in the head wrap diaries there was the head wrap bar, right, where people could go and like try doing learn how to do head wraps, which was like massively popular, Grace, in the head wrap diaries. I remember that was like super cool. What would you be interested in doing? This is also something that is really interesting, to prepare some concrete offers that you can go to venues with and say, look, this work is really aimed at, I don't know, children under 5. So like, is there like a wraparound thing to do with it that could be useful for them? Or are there particular communities or ways of engaging that could be valuable? And, you know, what's the deal? Is there a financial deal around that? How would that work? It's really useful to propose, have worked out a few concrete proposals of exactly what that would look like. How long would it be? Where would it take place? You know, that kind of thing. Even if you know that, like, you're just kind of making it up, if you have some concrete proposals that you could say, well, we could be flexible with this, but here are some ideas. It's useful to go to organisations with those sorts of ideas, because it really helps to build audience and excitement around projects. It's not compulsory. If that's not what you want to do, it's fine. But it's a really good way to build a deeper relationship with the people who come and experience your work. Number 6, preparing your fee. You need to know how much it costs to put your work on. I know that sounds really obvious, but it took me ages to know that. I just thought like, oh, I just got to take what they offer me. You need to know how much it actually costs. You need to do the sums, make a spreadsheet or on a napkin, whatever it is. Realistically, you do not want to be out of pocket for doing a gig. You do not want to be out of pocket for doing a gig. I'll just say that again. This is also quite interesting when you think about digital work, because what does it cost to put that on? Bit of a quandary, philosophical question there. But that's also to do with exclusivity and the period of time that they have it available, or what going rates are. It's a bit of the Wild West at the moment in terms of navigating digital fees. But looking at live performance, you really need to work out what is everybody's day rate. You know, are there consumables? Are there rentals? Like, what are the transport? What, you know, travel days? Everything in there. Work it out, and that's what you need to provide to venues. They may not be able to offer you the amount of money that it realistically costs to put it on. In fact, they probably won't be able to. But if you can offer them a breakdown of like, well, actually, this is what it costs me, then they're less likely to try and knock you down to a bargain bucket price. Because if you just say, oh, it's this amount of money out of nowhere, then they'll just, you know, it's not that they're trying to underpay you, but if you can't explain like why you picked that amount of money, they're much more likely to be able to think, well, you know, they're stretched. Most venues are very, very stretched, and you know, that's kind of the world that we're in. So you want to be ready for those sorts of discussions in just a really open way, and be like, well, look, this is what it costs. What we normally do is bridge that gap with Arts Council funding. So when you're putting together several gigs, as Grace is talking about, you line up all your ducks, try and get a few different gigs, sort of put them on hold and say, well, then I'll need to apply for Arts Council money, and then that will subsidise those costs. And that's the tricky part, is lining up a few opportunities, kind of holding them, and then trying to get some Arts Council money. And you need to time that right, because often venues will want to know if you've got the Arts Council money before they close their comms deadline, because they want to be able to announce that, put it on sale, be like, here's our spring programme or whatever with you in it. And then if you don't get your money, if you don't get your funding, and therefore you're going to be out of pocket and you can't do the gig, they don't want, you know, nobody wants to be in that position. So all of that has to happen quite far in advance. And it's worth asking venues, when do you close your programme? Like, when is your comms deadline? And making sure that you'll know the answer of your Arts Council application before that, if that's what you are going to rely on. Number 7, I'm going to speed up. Marketing materials. It's really useful to prepare some marketing materials around your piece. You need to know how to like talk about it. You need to understand how to talk about it in a way that venues and festivals are going to know who it's going to reach. It's really good to have a website where people can go and find out more stuff. And you know, have some decent images that you could be like, you know, that people could put online or promote the work with, and test out some copy. It's really useful when you're sort of trying to line up a tour or opportunity for your work, to write the kind of long and short brochure, that's so last century, you know, online copy. Well, what are you going to write about? You know, what's the paragraph of description of what the work is and what it's going to do? Test it out on people, road test it, get some responses, you know, and talk to venues and festivals about that. This is how I'm writing about the work. Does it work for your audiences? How does this read? That's really useful. So number 8, approaching venues and festivals. Well, how on earth do you do that? So let's say you've got your riders, you're all prepared, you've got your team. How on earth do you build relationships and interest in the work, especially if you don't already have those pre-existing relationships, right? So as Grace is saying, it's really good to go to venues and festivals where you already have some kind of relationship, right? So maybe they've already supported you, you've already done a bit of work for them, be it teaching or, you know, whatever. You know, first port of call is always like the organizations that you have a connection with already. They've already bought into the work, they bought into you somehow, they know you, they trust you. That's a great place to start. But you may also want to try and expand that network. How on earth do you do that? So before anything else, a really important thing is to be really clear about what the work is. To be able to say in a sentence what it is, just one sentence. It's an hour-long theatre piece that's about blah, or, you know, it's a concept touring which will be a 3-week project for these people, blah, you know, like just be able to sort of sum it up, because sometimes people have great ideas, but venues are like, and what, especially now, it's like, is it a gallery, film, like what is, it sounds great, but what, like I can't think about putting it in a program if I don't know what it is. So it's often so obvious to you, or perhaps you're in the middle of the creation period. It's like, how do you say, you need to be able to say it kind of in a sentence what it is. And then it's useful to go, if you're thinking of reaching out to organisations that you don't really know, it's really, really, really useful to go with some video, and ideally a video of the full thing, because not that many venues realistically program something that they haven't seen all the way through or in real life. It's a bit of a shame. Unless they've commissioned it, generally they want to have seen the whole thing. So that's a timing thing for you as well. If you're in the creation period, it's a bit of a waste of time reaching out to an organisation you don't already know if you haven't got a film of the whole thing. Blah, blah, blah. Who to approach? Know who is the programmer. Who's the programmer? Who do you know them? Do you know someone who could introduce you? Don't just send it, like generic emails are a trap. Like we do check them, I promise. That was my job at one point. They do get checked, but like it's really good to just look online. Who is the person who's involved in the program? And if you're not sure, you can, well, when people are back in offices, you can pick up the phone and ask. But it's useful to know who that person is. Importantly, don't just cold call at every organisation you see and every festival. Do your homework. Where do you want the work to sit? What context works well or helps you reach the audiences that you want to reach in the way that you want to reach them? So when you're looking at a venue or a festival, like try and find out who are their audiences, who goes to see their work, what are they programming? Does your work connect with that? What other artists tour there? What are the values of this organisation or festival? What kind of tech setup do they have? What kind of space do they have? It can be really good to look at artists you think make similar work to you, or similar scale work to you, or work that you like or aspire to. Where have they toured? Could you tour there? I'm going to try and speed up a bit. The other thing is, if you are trying to build those relationships before you finished making the work, invite those organisations where you think you'd eventually like to tour to your sharings. They may not come, but at least they'll know a little, they'll have like seen it in an email somewhere. Get people involved in the process is the best way to build a future possibility for performance. Then the other thing is keep your eyes peeled for open calls or showcasing events. See if there are things that are applying for. There's going to be lots of interesting stuff, I think, coming up now as scope and funding for touring is really sort of changing. So yeah, and go, if you start conversations with people, have a video, have a little tiny pack, like a PDF that looks cool with an image, a clear description of what it is, some concrete details. Definitely name drop any partners or cool connections that the work has had, so people can just in a quick scan think, oh, okay, that this has got, like, this is a team that mean business. And yeah, I mean, there's loads more to say on that, but there we are. And then I would say, then once you've got all that in line, then that's when you want to apply for funding, which is a whole nother topic. So yeah, maybe I should stop there because we're running slightly out of time. The other area that I am not an expert on is thinking about Brexit and how that's going to influence touring. This is an interesting resource on that. It's particularly aimed at outdoor touring, but lots of it is relevant. This is a resource pack that Split Second made, and you might find that useful. There's a question. Oh, someone's got to go. Thank you, Katie, sorry. Can I just run through the list of headings again? I mean, I can. They're not necessarily exhaustive, but I was thinking, 1, securing your team. 2, preparing a tech rider. 3, access rider, but also access for audiences. 3, sustainability, environmental considerations. Wait, that's 4, sorry. 5, wraparound stuff. 6, prepare your fee, do the work of preparing your fee. 7, marketing materials. 8, the approach to venues and festivals. 9, funding. I might just leave it there so that we've got a bit of time for questions, because me and Grace have just gone, we do like to talk. So yeah.
That's great. Thanks, both of you. I'm just going to come back to Grace made a comment about you also have to think about royalties for digital and live work. Grace, would you like to say something on that, please?
Yeah. So yeah, when Amy was talking about how you even price digital, if you're working, so depending on, as you keep creating work, or you might do it now, but for me, as I kept creating work, in the beginning, I would contract people, and because we weren't necessarily doing big scale things or long tours, I would kind of write in the contract in terms of intellectual property, copyright ownership, and all that kind of stuff, that we would, you know, I think I'd write something about them licensing us the kind of their portion of the intellectual property in perpetuity for worldwide use. That was a long time ago. That was like the early days, because you can't get away with that now. So usually people have like a license period. So you have like a set designer or a composer, and I usually do about 5 years, was like 60 months. And that's for kind of, you know, the rights of whatever they've done as part of this production. Now, one of the conversations last year about digital is that it works a little bit different, because that's for stage work and then that's for touring. But digital, we were kind of almost felt like we were just throwing that out. And because we were also going a little bit into the kind of media realm, and they have different types of contracts, and you're working with different people. So sometimes every time a work is shown, you might have to pay somebody royalties on that work, and you have to tie that into the fee. For stage work, you need to think about how you contract them in the first place. And usually, for the most part, I haven't ever come across an issue, but I haven't come across everything. You do that kind of fixed term period, and at the end of the fixed term, you just start again. You put in the contract that you aim to kind of renegotiate after that point, so that you can have rights to whatever. But it doesn't work like that for everybody. And because I work a little bit more across Europe, for example, venues will ask me about authors' rights, and authors' rights is basically that. And depending where you are, they will pay for that author's rights. So in the UK, we don't really do that. It's just like one bundle, here's your fee, you sort everything else out. But you just don't get, you have to be aware that this could be something that comes up. And let's say you work with somebody and they're amazing, but they're from, you know, like Brussels, Belgium, and they have a very different system, and they might expect to get royalties every time the work is performed. So just understand and that what you might be getting into depending on who you're working with. And then if you do tour internationally, people will ask for proof. So I've had to send contracts, but well, actually I've been all right. I didn't have to send contracts. I just assured them in the contract sent to us that we have all the rights. But I have asked somebody who toured, and she said that she's had to send contracts in the past to prove such things. So that's what I meant. It's just that actually there are these costs, because when Amy's talking about know how much it costs to take your work out on the road, and but that includes management. For me, I'm just like, well, that's how much, it's 1,500, and that's a really low figure. Let's say that's one person and a technician. But, it's 1,500 every time this work is performed, because we need a day, because I know the standard contract is 2 days in the UK. Let's say it's 2 days of time. Anything more than that, so you know how much it takes based on 2 days, let's say, get in, perform, get out. But if it might be 4 days, and you're paying people 4 days wages. Is it a week? You're paying a week's wages. Management, are you doing it per day? Are you doing it percentage? It's really, and it depends on your own financial situation and the way that you think you can manage it. So all these little things you need to consider. It might not be you by yourself. It sounds like really stressful, right, as we're talking about it, and you will get used to it. Everything you'll get used to, and some things, if you can take away now, that's amazing. Unfortunately, some things you learn after you made the mistake, but that's how we get smart. We're like, I'm never getting caught out like that again. But just have that in your mind, but don't feel overwhelmed by it. It's just, this is acquired knowledge, especially from the mistakes bit.
Yeah.
Has anybody got any other questions, or you want us to go over anything that we've said for further clarification? And to pick up on a couple of things that Amy said. For example, I'm now involved in a tour for outdoor piece, and it's with Without Walls. And I have to say, they were very on top of access needs and sustainability. So this is not an aside. We had meetings about both of these things, a few meetings. And it was really to ensure that and this is before we really started making the work. So it was it had to be integrated into our thinking about where we're sourcing our materials for, because we have a full set, and what is it that we can make sure we know that we can source locally. And we went back and forth about, do we need power, don't we need power, and maybe 15 years ago we would have said, oh, we'll get a generator, which isn't necessarily practical, but you get a generator, and now it's generators are no. And I mean, we went with no, and the work was almost, so the shape of the work was made in conjunction with that thinking. So it's not an aside. It's definitely something that you really should think about as well. How many people on the road do you need? Blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. Solar generator. I don't think that's in our budget. I've never. I had to keep it to a certain amount, and I didn't even want the generator. I was like, I'm not paying for that. That's extra transportation. But
also, maybe if you're touring in Italy or something, but in the UK.
I know, right? Yeah. We've got a show this weekend, and it's rain forecasted. So yeah. Come on, people. Something tickled your thinking.
Sorry, so does that mean that there's you've got no power if you've got no generators? So is your whole show working without power?
The sisters are pushing that thing. That's it. They're pushing it. That's what we ended up deciding. No power, because it was just a smarter decision. It's this can be manually operated versus being auto operated, whatever you want to call it. It was just well, then you're gonna have to push, and it works and then because we were building a set, then we make sure it's a smooth kind of rotating system, and it's not too heavy for them. But it's just smarter, because you just never know whether there's going to be power or there's not going to be power, and how long where it comes to. So yeah.
And there's a good question here in the chat. Could you suggest the best type of person to speak to about the ins and outs of PRS and sound rights for a show? That's not my area of massive expertise, and that's one of the reasons why I've always had like composed music for a lot of the stuff I've done, because it's a bit of a minefield. I don't know if Grace or Lou or Pip, you have more to say on that. I mean, venues usually have their own policy about that, so it's useful to know what that is, but you need to have cleared the rights basically, and you may need to pay, and it's sometimes astronomical, or they don't give permission at all. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, usually if you've showed an attempt to say, I'd like to use this piece of music, you write to the publishing company or whatever, like, I'd like to use this piece of music for this particular context, 12 people in Falmouth are going to see it, so it's not making loads of money, it's not a big deal, and will it be right? Usually they like don't even bother to reply, in which case you can be like, well, I tried, but that's not actually clearing the rights, is it? So it's a bit of a grey area. So maybe you, Grace, and Lou and Pip have more to say on that, but I normally just steer completely clear of it as an artist.
Yeah, okay. Amy's correct in one sense. A few years ago, we decided to stop using ready-made music because, well, one, artistically, I say we, like, which we I'm talking about, but most, all companies I work with, we usually try and create music specifically for that. In the olden days, because PRS and what's the new terminology? We're talking about two different things. You've got PRS where you've got like playing, you can just fill out the form, and then you're in a pub or whatever and you're just playing the music. Then you've got the theatrical music. I'm sorry, I was trying to look for it because I've actually got it down. PLS, I don't know, yeah, maybe you have to write the whole name for me to kind of remember, but you've got the one where you have to go to the licensing, the publishers, and you have to specifically approach the publisher and get the right of usage of that track. Right, so it really depends what the track is. You are the one left to find out who the publishers are, and then you have to find out who the contact is, and you have to contact them. This is why people steer away from it, because I had to do this for Reunited, which is a Lane Dancers film. By chance, the composer who we worked with was like saying, yeah, use my track. And then by the time, and that was agreed with the choreographers, this is an existing relationship, he's a musician, but he also has a band. And then when I talked to him, he's like, oh, wait, hold on, I've got publishers and, you're going to need to clear it through them. And it was an absolute nightmare. So you have to kind of go back and forth. There's some publishing companies have a minimum. Some works have more than one publishers linked to it, because there was a singer who had a different publishing company, and then the composer who had one publishing company. And so I managed a cheap deal with one, and then the other one was like, no, we'll never take that. And they charge more, but the kind of working practice is that you go with the highest figure, not the lowest. So that meant that the other company who I got a cheap deal with, I had to match what I was. Everybody basically has to get the same money, and it took weeks because they're very slow. And I don't think she reads an email properly, because it was a bit frustrating. So if you're trying to clear kind of the rights to use a certain track, you're usually the one that needs to do the work. And should you put a fee split proposal inside the tour pack?
Oh, okay, yeah, just still on the music rights. It's worth, like Grace says, takes ages, and it's worth to do it way before you choreographically become too attached to the music. That's happened to a producing and touring project at the place recently. It's like the piece is practically made and the artist was like, yeah, I'm sure it's going to be fine. And actually, for some secret reason that they haven't been able to divulge, the publishing company are like, there's a legal situation going on and we can't give the rights to anybody for anything. And it's like, oh, and the whole piece is like made around this music. On the opposite side, 9 Inch Nails and a production I was in, the choreographer contacted them and they were like, yeah, you can have it for free, it's great, sounds like a cool project. So you're like, okay, but it's a lottery, and it's quite it can be prohibitively expensive.
And mine happened with the film. We finished the filming, it was edited and I was going through this entire process, and we had 1 week before, don't tell the people, before the first premiere, and I was like, this hasn't been agreed. And so I went on like just producer mode, like, just barrage of like, can you please confirm, because they actually had confirmed, they hadn't sent the contract. And in the music world, I think a contract is incredibly important. I mean, contracts are important, but I was just like, I've heard too many nightmare stories about kind of music companies and publishing companies. I got it in the end, but get it in advance. Just don't mess around. And Amy's right, don't get attached.
Just adding on to that, like we have Pip and I have dealt with an awful lot of different music rights as well over this last year, because of people showing stuff over Zoom
and
YouTube, and everything is different. So Zoom rights, YouTube rights, film rights, live rights are all different. If you're performing within a fringe, so you're performing at Brighton Fringe or Edinburgh Fringe, then PRS is different there. It's all different. And like Amy was saying, I was involved with a show where we wanted to use a Led Zeppelin song, and we wrote to their publishers and they said, no, absolutely not. So then we decided to use a Cure song. We wrote to the Cure and they said, yeah, it sounds like a great project, have it for free. But then there's so many different music publishers as well. Like the music world is not like the dance sector. There are thousands of small producers, big producers, and musicians traditionally as well, small musicians whose stuff gets used for free all the time and they're not getting the money. And like the big guys are getting the stuff from PRS, but the small guys aren't. And so, you know, you are in a similar boat to everyone else. You want to make sure that those musicians are also getting the money. So yeah, I also would agree. I cannot reiterate enough to think about that music right at the start and make sure you've got the rights for it and that you've spoken to the artist, you've spoken to the right person. Because we as Southeast Dance, like having to host You Dance, there were loads of pieces of work where we had to go back to the people who've made the work and said, we can't show this, you haven't got the rights for it. And you know, and then what are they going to do? They can't re-choreograph their whole piece to a different piece of music and remake the film, and then there's a whole load of things, aren't there, with sync rights and all different.
Because it actually makes your piece of work, it limits its life basically, because you can't then just send it out to loads of different places, because you're going to be limited by what you can do with it, because you don't have the rights to put it on these different platforms. So it does end up being a complete nightmare. I've had a complete nightmare. I've just been doing it myself for our film, and everyone says no, or can I have £400 please, or it's just like you end up just being so frustrated. I'll never do it again. And
there is a load of royalty-free music. You know, if you don't have any funding and you can't afford to work with a composer, there's Google royalty-free music, and there is a lot out there.
Yeah, and another thing that can be a cheesy solution, but it can be quite useful, is if there's a type of track you really want, you can say to a composer, and they do this in TV and stuff all the time, they use it like a guide track and say, I want something with this tempo or with this rhythm or with this vibe, can you make something that sounds a bit similar? And you'd be surprised how close you can get to it without it being actually it. That can be very cheesy and not right for some projects, because maybe you want the real thing, but like that actually can be quite useful sometimes. Should we put a fee split? Oh, is that similar to the karaoke backing tracks? That is such a good question, and I don't know the answer. And there's a project that we're going to support that is all about karaoke. Oh, we're joined by Grace's little kid. Hi. Right. Great. Sorry, horrific, same kind of thing. Karaoke backing tracks, I think they are still owned by publishing companies, so it's actually probably still the same thing. And it'll be the song, it'll be like, it's still the song that's owned by the artist, and so I think it's just as complicated, and that's an area that I personally need to do some work on, because I don't know.
It is just as complicated, because again, Pip and I had a similar situation where somebody had covered a song, and they said, oh, but we've got the permission from that artist who covered the song, but the artist doesn't own that song. And that's the same as karaoke. Somebody always owns that song.
And you've got a mixture of you've got the different elements of music, and then if you've got vocals, then the writers also, you'd have to get into the writers of the song if anything has lyrics. So it's a bit of a minefield. So I'd say if you can, start saving for a composer.
Yeah, and
just to not through it.
Yeah, and the same thing goes for text or images or video, like anything that you lift at someone else's work, you know, an image, a painting, anything, you need to get those rights and investigate that soon enough, because if it's going to be like a really central thing for your piece, then you don't want to get so attached that you run into trouble. Sorry, just go back to the question about the fee or split proposal inside the tour pack. My personal approach to that is a fee, mainly because most of the things that I've done are like one-off gigs. I think once you get into doing like a run or something, then like a longer set, then splits can work. But it also depends on what the venue are doing and how their finances are actually stacking up and what they propose. I think it's useful to put in a tour pack what you would ask for, because then it's the start of a negotiation, like what you would ideally want to make sure that your costs are covered. But like, unless you're really sure you're going to get an amazing audience, splits are like quite risky. If you're going to a city where you don't, you know, like two people, your two mates are going to come, and then you don't know if an audience is going to come, it's not going to be a great deal for you as a split. So I would normally just go for a fee that makes sure that you've covered all your costs. I don't know if Grace and Lou and Pip have got more opinion on that, but
I say no to a split. Those don't help anybody. In our, what we, you know, in terms of dance and just, you know, this kind of short time that we're around, it just doesn't work. But I also don't put fees inside my packs. I just don't mention it. And that's not because I don't have one. It's just because in case I change my mind. It's literally like that license to go, oh, I think I could squeeze a little bit more, or, you know, I've got my base, and it's like I'm not going lower than that. But if I do think, and don't ask me what makes me think, it just really depends, because I would have had a conversation usually beforehand. Do I think I could get a little bit more than I would? Also, that's if you're just the performance. You know, Amy mentioned about wraparound activity, workshops, other things. There are other elements that kind of, you know, if you've got a system that adds to what you're going to get in the end. So I don't include it. I guess I'm being a little bit evasive, but I do know if you have a conversation.
Yeah, I do the same, because also it might be different, like also because of, say, geography. It might be that you, in some venue, will have to do the get-in on the same day of the show, and you'll be traveling up the night before, but that's different than if you have like a whole day get-in. That, you know, it depends what you've negotiated around the tech rider, for example, how much the thing is going to cost. Let's say one venue has got the kind of projector you need and another one doesn't, and you have to hire it, then you want to, like, how are you going to work that out? So I agree that it's good not to put a fixed fee, but to put it in your correspondence and to be really clear about what your costs are in the correspondence. So that's what something is asked about. Alison has asked about that. Do you normally get different fees from different venues, or is it normally the same across the tour? I would say there's a bit of variation because of those sorts of reasons, but it's usually within a rough ballpark.
Yeah, it's definitely, we mentioned it before, it's how long you're going to be wherever it is you're going to be, because you need to pay everybody. So if you have a minimum fee, I know my minimum fee is based on kind of 2 days of time, and then I just have to kind of shift it up. Well, yeah, no, my minimum fee is based on like 3 or 4 days, I think it is, sorry, and then on a single bill, but then on a one performance. But again, when we go, let's say a specific European country, they might want 2 shows in one day. So we did Vienna the year before last, and I think we ended up doing 4 or 5 shows, because we did I can't remember, but it was just a lot of shows. And so and then I had to think about when we were getting there, how long we were going to be there, how many of us are there, because that's a longer run, blah blah blah. So it's not that I'm just trying to stiff people, it's just there are other considerations that need to happen. And just to note, UK touring as well, that does shift because some venues don't offer travel accommodation per diems. separately from the fee. So therefore I have to consider that, and then others do, or they do partially or something like that. So you have to kind of really understand what the offer is before you can actually give a fee sometimes. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I just add into that as well, Alison, that sometimes I'm looking at the whole tour, and there are some venues that I know that I have a great audience there. I really like the staff that work there. They might be a more rural venue, and I know they've got much smaller budgets than the ones that are in the centre of the city that I go to all the time. And so often I know I can ask more at this venue, and I can ask less at that venue, but that will balance out my covering all of my costs.
One thing I'm going to point out is, though, that we've been talking about when you almost can and can't accept fees, and how you think about it, is there's a difference between kind of pre-planning a tour and then you have the ability to balance the spreadsheet, so to speak. So you can take a little bit less here because you're going to get a little bit more there, or you're like, oh, okay, we're a bit short here, so can I get X, Y, and Z? That's one thing, and that's kind of pre-planned, and you think about your travel accommodation per DMs. But there's another thing, when someone just comes along and goes, can you do the show? And that's a little bit harder, because you want to do the show, but you kind of do have a bottom line. And yeah. I've come to a stalemate a couple of times, and it was just because we just couldn't afford to do it. It's just like, it's out of pocket. It literally, we're basically paying to perform. And it's sad, but you have to walk away, because otherwise who's paying? Who's paying for it? Yeah. Even with me not getting paid, that's already like in kind right there. But all this negotiation and all the other work, then we would actually have to subsidize it.
Yeah, and that's where I think the timing of it's really important, that if you can just be frank and say, look, I'm not in an Arts Council funded period for this tour right now. If they just come out of the blue and say, ooh, could you be in this festival? You're like, God, I'd love to, but actually you can't match the costs of putting this on. So I'd be inclined to agree with Grace and just say, look, it's you have to draw a line somewhere and say, look, I'm not actually going to pay to put my own work on. But I'm putting together a tour next year, so could you, if you're interested in doing it, let's like line up the things, and then maybe I can subsidize. Let's talk. It's great if somebody offers you to do the work, but it's just about being really direct and honest, and just laying it out on the table what the financial situation is, and not being afraid to be quite frank about that.
The next question is about outdoor touring. I'm just going to tell you now, they pay significantly more than indoor theatres for dance. They pay sometimes triple the amount that some venues pay. And with this tour, when I was doing the budget, we were commissioned, and I was working with the commission money. And then for some reason, I forgot to add the actual income. Just, great. Lesson 101, add your income. So because I also had to settle on what the fee was, and because I hadn't done extensive outdoor touring, I was just like, but I knew that they paid more. I had all this information, but I was just like a bit, the trepidation of like, this is how much I want to charge. Is it going to work? And it actually did. And, but when I put all of that income as well, because they usually have, they ask you to do it on 1 show a day, 2 shows a day, up to 3 shows a day. So the cost changed. And they also like you to be there for at least 2 days. And so then that is also more. It was just a really great amount of income, because I was getting all stressed about what we could afford. And so, yeah, so they pay more. They pay more, and that's the only thing I can say. And they pay for travel accommodation per diems separately. It's not included in the fee. So that's been my experience so far. It's great.
But that's where I would say, if you're used to touring, say, outdoors, and you're not sure how things will happen in a theatre, or you're used to doing like short works, and you're thinking about or you're a different format or a different context, that's where I'd say look at your team of people and be like, I could do with a coffee with someone who has done this, and like pick someone's brain. And that's really useful. I think people often don't mind sharing a bit of info, about how stuff like that. Well, like Grace, it's like a different culture. It's like a whole other way of working. Like all their finances are totally different because, as you say in the question, they're not necessarily charging tickets. So yeah, like use your network and find out how stuff gets done.
One thing that I wanted to pick up on, Amy said as well, and that just jogged my mind, was just when you are planning, and I mentioned like kind of the ideation. Is that how you say ideation? Sounds like idiot, but idea. From the idea stage or to when something's performed, I would say it takes about 2 years. Just you might go through an R&D, you know, go through your fundraising, then you go through creation, and then you get a premiere. Whether or not you have a tour after, that's a different conversation. But just be aware of the timeframes venues work in. So I would say don't go to them in April and go, oh my God, in September, I want to do X, Y, and Z, because they're not probably even going to respond. You know, people are planning in advance. You have to think what financial year they work in, and they are spending the next financial year's budget, and that's what they're thinking about a lot of the times. Not everybody, but at the same, you know, but a lot of the times. So when you are making conversation, if you can, or planning, think about that. Think about when people will be planning their 2020, what I don't know what year this is, 21. Yeah, so people might be planning their spring 22 in Europe. I had a booking a year and a half. Like Belgium, they were so, and plus they put the tickets on sale and we sold out, and then COVID happened. But I'm just saying, we sold out like 9 months before the show was even meant to happen. But some people do, they're like really in advance. And some people are just like kind of one season, like weather season or 2 weather seasons in advance, depending on financial year. So just take that into consideration. You might not have, you know, and be considerate of that as well. And it makes it sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, a classic one for that is like the Brighton Festival, isn't it, Lou and Pip? Like there's a really clear, it's like it takes ages to find out what on earth schedule they're working on from the outside. You're like, how do I get in? But actually there's this really small window where they have some options, they take it to the curatorial team, and then it's closed, and then it's closed. That's it, they've done it. And so you've got to get in at the right moment. And like Grace said, you should just ask and find out, like, when are your programming timelines? Like, how do you do that? Lots of theatres generally work about a year in advance in the UK. I think generally some galleries work a lot longer than that, because they tend to book exhibitions 2 or 3 years in advance, and then they somehow slot performance stuff kind of around that. But some things are really short notice. So it's worth to do that little bit of homework and thinking.
I've got a question because it comes up a lot, and I know that Grace, you talked about touring some digital work, and Amy as well, and we get asked all the time about how to make money digital touring. If either of you would like
well, technically we so wait, with all the works that I've done, we had funding, so we got the funding for it, and the royalties are like 5 years or whatever it is. So in theory, anytime we're booked, that is an income, because there are no additional costs post when it was being made. That you have to think about that, and that's what I thought about, because I was just like, oh, you know, I wasn't going to be tied down to anything financially. So in theory, but at the same time, it's not a lot of money, because I think I'm still stuck on how much you charge. I've got a fee, but I'm just like, it doesn't feel enough. But I'm like, unsure. Actually, I did get like 800, 900. I don't know. It was something like, I was like, oh, okay. So can I charge this, or was this just a fluke? So I think I'm not gonna lie, I'm still stuck on like, what is the kind of right amount to charge? But because of the deal and the way that we shaped it beforehand, we've got no additional cost every time we show it for the next few years. So what we are actually doing is trying to show it enough to earn back what it costs to make, if that makes sense. And so that means financially, you're not looking at it. I mean, it's your income, and you have to, like, when you do tax and stuff like that, you have to figure it out. But at the same time, we're keeping a financial tally of like every time it's shown. And then periodically we start pushing it again. And like we start like going, you know, do you want it here? Do you want it there? And it's part of our kind of repertoire. And so we're not letting it go. But I don't know if I've got like the answer. I just think practically make sure you don't have any cost every time you have to show it.
Yeah, I think it makes a bit of difference if it's going to be something that's accessible for free, or like how long it's going to be, if it's exclusive rights that they want for a certain period. It's quite difficult to know how much to ask for, honestly. I don't know, Lou and Pip, like it's quite, like it's not clear, like there's not like standard amount. So I mean, go for gold, I would say, start high, because you're only going to get whittled down. So, go for gold. Yeah, I guess try to understand like what the context of viewing it will be. And the other thing is thinking about how digital touring can be strategically useful for you. Like if you're trying to build an audience somewhere, or you want to, could it be tied in with some sort of live activity you're planning, or is there a way that you can make it also useful for you, which isn't only about money, but like because it's the thing about digital touring, it's a bit weird, it sort of like happens and you're not involved, and it's almost like it didn't happen. So how can you make that interesting and useful for you, so it's not just like a blip on the digital radar? Like that's the interesting questions. There's another one here in the chat. Do venues normally have a cap on how many shows they'll host in their program per season? That's a really interesting question. I mean, yes, because there's only so many days a year, and also there'll be a requirement, like you can only fit so many in with get-ins and get-outs around technicians' time and the amount of days off they need to have and stuff. And how many technicians they've got on salary, for example, or that's one thing. It'll also be that there's certain times of year where they know that they don't get an audience. So let's say coming up to Christmas, some venues, of course, do really well, and other venues not so much. Depends what the program is. Some venues, I don't know if this is still the case, but there was a bit of a myth in like mixed art form venues that they would have a sort of a loose cap on like how many dance shows they might have in their season, whatever. That's
true.
I think there's a bit of a quota there, and I think that operates in a really unuseful way sometimes. But yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean that's a really great question to bring to a venue or a festival, and just like, ask them like how does it work? How many shows do you put on? Like, and how does that work for you? It'll usually, to be honest, most venues do not across the season don't really make money on selling tickets. Most dance venues don't manage it, and they're actually subsidizing what they put on. So there's also that sum that they need to do, like the more shows they put on, potentially the more they're subsidizing that season. But yeah, it's probably different for different places. I don't know if anyone else has got other thoughts on that one.
I would just say that usually when I have the conversation, it's also their financial model, which plays into what Amy was saying as well. So it's the financial model of how much they've got to pay for bringing it in, but also the in-house costs as well. That's what Amy mentioned. And when I was in organizations, we would have our kind of program, we would have like, maybe it was, I can't remember, I want to say like quarterly financial meetings, because we'll start the financial year with like, this is the income target, this is your kind of expenditure target, and you just kind of, and you work off of that. And that's why people are programming in advance, because we're working to budgets as well as other things. I don't know if Lou or Pip, soon to be venue proprietresses.
I think it's different, isn't it, for all venues? Like some venues program in seasons, some venues program with a festival model. If you think about the South Bank, like they program a festival model. So I think they're all different. So I think the advice throughout has been like, go to the venues as early as possible. So because some venues are thinking like 3 years ahead. So if it's not right for next year or the year after, you've got something in the pipeline that you can say, well, let's have a conversation about that. And I guess it's not completely like that, but often often I feel like they say that because it sort of comes back to this old classic argument of, oh, we don't have an audience for that. And sometimes it might be that you could say, okay, well, we could think about how in 2 years or 3 years time we could help you get an audience for that. You know, I know that when I took a load of programmers to see an amazing piece of Amy's work, like some of them said to me, oh, I loved it, but we don't have an audience for that. And I was like, okay, let's have a conversation about how you could get an audience for that. What would you need to do so that maybe in 3 years time you could program Amy's work? And then they were really open to that. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, we could. You know, I was like, you could bring Amy in to work with your youth group, and you know, then they'll come and see Amy's work and they'll bring other people. So yeah, it also helps you really if you're thinking in advance. You can win them over.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks for that. I remember that. And also, yeah, that's such a big topic, actually. I kind of vaguely touched on it, but not directly, as you just said. Actually put your finger on something really, really important, which is this thing of audience building and whether different venues think they have an audience for what you do. And sometimes that's based on not really understanding what you do and not really understanding that you might know, I mean, they know their audiences, but they know the audiences that they already have. They don't necessarily know the audiences that they don't yet have. And you might be the person who can help them reach that audience that they don't yet have, that they want, but they don't know it yet because you haven't been there. So it's like how to build that relationship, exactly as Lou was saying, is really important. And sometimes it rests on like hilarious misunderstandings about who you are or what your work is or who your community is, you know, the queer community or, you know, the Black community, or, you know, like, it's like, what is that? Like, what are you even like assuming about this or that to do with different kinds of work? That's where the good conversations can be, because you know your own work much better than a venue, and you will know who your audiences are, and you know how it will move people and how to bring them. And you'll also understand what the barriers are for people to come to certain venues that those venues may not yet understand or might not be even aware of. So just a really concrete example is that the copy of my show had the word dyke in it. So it's like a sort of like a joke about being the only dyke in the dance class, which is like a play on this funny comedy thing. It's about being the only gay in the village, like the only dyke in the dance class. And that's like, I'm using it about myself. It's like a jokey word, but it's also a word of empowerment. It's like a political word. And one venue was like, oh, well, that's offensive language and we can't use that. And I was like, I'm not going to euphemize that, because that shows like a certain community, like they'll connect, they know what that means. And like, you know, why, you know, you're not understanding that that's a word of empowerment. I've had the same about the word queer as well, that some venues are still nervous that that's like a kind of slur. And of course, historically it has been, but it's like, well, actually, if you were engaged in queer discourse, you'd know that that is the clarion call for the queer community to be like, oh, maybe this is for me because it's a term of empowerment. And it cuts across all kinds of different sets of experiences and themes and topics, where like getting into those detailed conversations about the way in which your work might be appealing to different people and whether a venue can see that or not. This is the awkward conversation that often people don't want to have. They're like, yeah, we've booked our season already, because they're just thinking like, oh, I just can't see how I can make this work. And it might be that you've used a word or there's something about your work that they think, oh, we can't see this fitting. But actually, if you'd had a discussion about it, you might see a way for it to work. It's complicated and delicate, and it doesn't always work out, and it's quite an uphill slog and can be quite disconcerting sometimes, depending on what your work is trying to do. But yeah, this is a classic case of who are your allies, and Lou was like a brilliant ally to like challenge people on that, which was like a very brilliant thing. And then COVID came and I didn't perform it, but that's working back up to that.
As ever with these conversations, we have run over time, but I don't want to finish if anyone's thinking, oh, I had a burning question to ask Grace or Amy. So please do ask if you've got one last question. No? Okay, well, thank you so much, both of you. It's such a great conversation. As ever, be so lovely to do this in person, in real life. So next year, let's hope we can all do this together in the dance space in Brighton, and then with some gin afterwards. And we have just one Mind the Gap session left. Can't believe it. Last one next week. Next Thursday.
At 11 o'clock.
With the fantastic Dr. Angela Picard, who is really, really brilliant. And I know that evaluation can sound really boring and really dry, but she's really, really interesting. And I think we all tend to think of evaluation as something we have to do for our Arts Council funding. But actually she's really brilliant at thinking about it in a different way, and really thinking about how evaluating your work can really help to develop your work constantly into the future. Like what learning can you put in place, and thinking about everything from audiences that we've just been discussing through to other artists that you're working with. And so please do come along. As ever, it's free. Sign up on the website or share it with other people that you think might be interested. And we have the Kickstart cohort program out, which, if you don't know, that's the dance entrepreneurs that we are employing, and that closes tomorrow. So you have to go through your job coach. But if you were thinking about doing that and you haven't done it, or somebody else was thinking about it, it's the deadline tomorrow. So please do give them a little poke. And just thank you again, Amy. Thank you, Grace. So brilliant as ever. And thank you, everybody, for coming. And hopefully see some of you on Thursday.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Have a good evening.